Hey guys, thanks for joining us. We're doing a live Q&A about biomes today. Oh, look at that. Miguel has his sheet with him, so he is ready. I will hand this over to Miguel and let him tell you about the biomes.
Polar desert, tundra, graminoid tundras, alpine tundras, taigas, alpine forests, coniferous forests, deciduous forests, evergreen forests, grassland steppes, montane steppes, shrub steppes, arid deserts, semi-arid deserts, grass and shrub savanna, woodland savanna, tree and shrub savanna, tropical wetland, freshwater, swamp wetland, freshwater, tropical rainforest, mangrove, saltwater.
There you go. That is all of them.
I've often found in games that are monochromatic or where there's a singular environment, it has a short lifespan when it comes to the fun factor and playability. So you get tired of it pretty quick versus a game that has multiple different environments and different looks and feels and allow you to experience the game in different ways instead of the same way over and over again.
One of the ways in which we build this world is by identifying all the different biome life that can exist, whether it's flora or fauna, and then figuring out where it can and cannot live. And so one of the main reasons why we have a lot of the biomes is just to kind of allow us to filter with a high degree of fidelity where you will and will not find animals and plants of various different types. And then as Eddie was saying is having so many different biomes also means that as you're traveling throughout the world, which is a big world, remember we're talking 128 kilometers across in one direction, that as you're traveling you're going to see a lot of visual differences, even subtle things like certain types of trees will stop being popular in an area and another type of tree will become popular and the animals are going to adjust accordingly. So it's about diversity. It's all about diversity. Yeah. Diversity.
Kingdoms, they're generally going to fall around the edges of biomes and specifically watersheds, right? Water source is usually one of the biggest determinants as to whether or not you can live there. You're not going to find a county that has multiple biomes, and for the most part, duchies probably are going to exist within one, maybe two biomes. It depends on whether or not they're within transition zones or not.
The way that we do the world generation is it's a multiple layer system. So, we generate the individual continents, and then we based on the continents, we take into account things like weather patterns and elevation and humidity from that. And then ultimately we generate kind of what you would consider the economic or kingdom boundaries at the end after the entire terrain is generated. And so counties will tend to divide along watersheds and water boundaries. Duchies will tend to be along boundaries of biomes themselves, and then kingdoms can actually have multiple biomes that exist within them. That's not to say you're never ever going to find a county that has multiple biomes within them, but they'll tend to be transition biomes or things that kind of give a similar feel. It would not. So that there's a difference between at-world generation. Basically, when people get into exposition, or really during settlement selection, what they're picking from is like which of the boundaries for the domains they want. So which county they want, which duchy they want, which kingdom they want, which settlements they want, and things like that. Those are going to be based on boundaries that are established as a result of kind of the natural boundaries, the watersheds, the mountains, the forests, and things like that. But ultimately, once players pick the settlement that they want, then they're going to be fast-forwarding time. I mean, they're going to be playing forward. So creating new forest area doesn't necessarily automatically mean that your county now extends to where that forest boundary was. What it does do, though, is it creates a nice shade of cover between your side of the county and the county next to you. So if you're looking to encroach into a neighboring county and you don't want anybody to know about it, then planting trees there is certainly one strategy.
It's a metagame.
Yeah.
It is.
It's like, oh my God, how did that forest get there?
Right.
I had no idea.
So, while I'm not going to answer any specifics as to the techniques you can use, yes, you can alter a biome over time. I mean, one example would be deforestation versus, afforestation. You could plant trees also, and that will affect the biome. Absolutely, yes. It's part of the problem space that the biomes represent, right? Storage of food, that's a big one, and it's a problem that people have to find ways to overcome, and so that problem presents itself as gameplay, right? How do I ensure that my food lasts long enough for me to make it through the winter?
Or carry a smell that attracts dangerous animals. The biome affects the architecture a great deal because of the materials used to build the buildings, and spaces will be gathered from that biome. Also, the style, the overall style and look of the architecture will depend upon the culture of the tribes that live there that are building the spaces.
One of the things that we do heavily when trying to work out the architecture in a region, and Miguel actually spent a lot of time working with Eddie on this as well as doing research, is what things historically drive the architecture in a region, and a lot of it has to do with the resources that are available, and a lot of it's cultural too. Their fears and aspirations, whether or not the environment around is conducive, not only from a resource standpoint, like whether or not there's wood versus clay, but also what your level of protection is from wind, from other elements, from predators and things like that. Like those all work to dictate the architecture that we use, the amount of lighting, where you are in terms of latitude, the humidity, those things all play a role, and those have both a mechanical design element to it as well as a visual element.
Yes, they will. Not all of them, but the animals that do migrate will. Depends on whether or not they're endemic to an area and whether or not they're capable of adjusting to varying temperatures internally, and it's just going to depend on the animal. But yes, they will migrate.
I want the visual style of the biomes and everything that goes in it to tell a story. The game's called Chronicles of Elyria, and anytime you walk through an environment, it's going to have its own chronology of what has happened there based on what you find. Each place that has had events tells a story, and all you have to do is experience the environment, look at the world around you, and everything from the people, the animals, the plants, relics, carvings in the wood, things that have been left there either by humans or by natural events will tell a story of that biome, and I want that to come out in the artistic vision of the game. It's not just about having a style or a look, it's about telling a story, always about telling a story.
Eddie's going to head out, but thank you very much for joining us, and
Yeah.
I'm glad we got a chance to talk to them a little bit about the artistic style stuff. We will let him go, and then we will continue to go through the questions on design and mechanics, but thank you very much.
Thanks, Eddie.
Anything that we view as aesthetic, we kind of want a motivating factor for that. If we're having logs and foliage and underbrush and all these different things that are happening naturally in the forest, we kind of want to make sure that there's a mechanic in place for those, for why they would exist, for what content and challenges they add. So mud, sand, snow, those will affect your movement. Even moving through fields, like wheat fields potentially. Usually it's going to be particle effects, it'll be a change in animation, it'll be something to indicate why you're moving slower. If you're moving through mud, your character's going to have to lift their feet up a little bit to unstick. If they're moving through a snowbank, they're going to have to kick through the snow a little bit.
There's a lot we can do with SFX too.
Yeah.
That's the kind of sound design I like to see in a game. In places where it makes sense, yes, because those are visual indicators that allow players to know, where certain materials are, and if they're unique or they have some sort of unique reason for occurring in the first place that might not match up with reality, then we obviously want to put some sort of indicator. But at other times, you're just going to have to use common sense.
Metals and minerals and saps and pretty much all the natural, whether it's organic or non-organic, like we'll tip our hands a little bit so that you guys can learn where to find those, but you're not going to always see at every single instance a visual indicator, but that doesn't mean you can't try and find it.
True, and there's probably a logic to why things are in a certain place.
I would hope so.
Yeah.
We take a combination of elevation, latitude, and humidity, and we use that to figure out where the different biomes are. And so, as a result of the fact that elevation changes gradually, there are areas that are kind of low elevation and mid elevation and high elevation. And so when we populate those with the different flora and fauna, it naturally creates a transition between those two rather than being a hard cut. So it's not like we're going in and saying, all right, this group of tiles is where we're going to put a biome, and this group of tiles is going to be another. Like, it's not top-down design like that, it's bottom-up. We just let the elevation and the latitude and the humidity dictate what kind of biome it is, and as a result of that, what kind of flora and fauna exist in that region. And so it should feel really natural, and the transitions should be very organic as a result of that.
if you're caught in a snowstorm and you're not wearing a jacket, your character's probably going to suffer, whether it be incapacitation or grievous wounds, which Jeremy can talk about. Permadeath, probably not, but there will be impacts. So dress appropriately is the general idea.
Yeah, I mean, the biomes are that's part of the mechanic, is making sure that you're dressed appropriately and that you're properly prepared for those. If you're inside of a biome and you're not properly prepared, either too hot or too cold, you're going to suffer fatigue from that. You're not going to have as much energy. Eventually your vitality is going to run out faster and you're going to pass out or whatever. Worst case scenario, you will suffer grievous wounds and be forced to spirit walk. And that's, he said, I'll talk to that. One of the things that we're really trying to do in this game is differentiate the different types of what you would call deaths in other games. And spirit walking has been a term that we've been using to talk about kind of the more serious form of incapacitation when there's actually spirit loss and you have to walk the astral plane and find your way back to your body. So grievous wounds is actually what we call coup de grace. So whenever you are coup de grace, or when you would normally consider something death from extreme weather or from animals or something like that are actually evil, that want to take your life away. They want to force you to spirit walk, and then what you're doing is you're suffering grievous wounds.
Right. That said, there might be a couple fringe cases. Like if you're forced to spirit walk because of weather, and you're like 90 years old, and you don't have any spirit left, then you will probably perma-die.
Yeah.
In that case, but
so,
that's
it's not that the environment itself is a
Yeah.
permadeath environment. It's just that you don't have enough spirit to make it back.
Right.
Not really.
No.
We talked about this before. Like every creature has genetics, and you can breed them. There is the opportunity to kind of breed for specific traits and things like that. But keep in mind, evolution is not a quick process.
Correct.
And even over a 10-year lifespan in this game, for the 10-year story at least, we're only talking about 500 years. That's not a long time for natural selection or any kind of evolution. Now, there might be introduction of some mutation and things like that. We'll speed it up because we want to introduce new things. But yeah, I don't think, depending upon what you're thinking about for that question, I don't think you're going to get the answer you're looking for.
That is a great question, and you're going to have to find out, because animals are going to have different behaviors, and some of them are going to be capable of adapting, and some of them won't, and all of them probably are going to try and adapt. What that's going to look like might just be death. But
Theirs or yours?
exactly. Climate change? That's a whole
We don't
other
really
system
have
we have to develop
we don't
for.
really have pollution yet. I mean, that's a technological advancement that hasn't really happened yet. So there's not really. No, I'm gonna say at this point, no. You're not gonna see huge climate changes as a result of pollution and things like that. Deforestation, yes, we definitely know that's gonna be a thing. But beyond that, I'm gonna say no, not right now. This actually ties directly into the world generation system. We are aware of things like rain shadows. So when we populate the world with elevation, it creates high areas, which are areas of cooler temperature and lower humidity. And when you pass high humidity over top of it, it forces it to rain. So you're going to get actual rain on the top of the mountains. But then as a result of the rain dumping itself on top of the mountain, there's no humidity on the other side. So it creates what's called a rain shadow, which means that your deserts are typically, though not always, going to be on the opposite side of a large mountain as a result of the air current and this concept of rain shadows. So it definitely has an impact.
Well, in a tropical rainforest, you're going to find a lot of diversity in terms of the species that are populating, right? So you're going to find tons of flora and tons of fauna that are all varied. You never know what you might find in a tropical rainforest, but it's definitely worth exploring.
During character creation, there are actually two components to that. There is racial bonuses, or what we call tribal bonuses, or tribal traits, and then there's regional traits. And the idea is that when you are creating your character and you join a family that's a specific tribe, that tribe over periods of however many years will have adapted to their environment. So there are passive bonuses that you get as being a part of that, whether or not it's being able to survive better in a cooler climate or a hotter climate or something like that. Your character, that particular tribe, has their own adaptations. At the same time, though, when you move or relocate to a new biome, after a period of time, you're going to start to adapt, just like us. We acclimate to our environment. So there are certain skills that you might be able to learn faster in certain biomes than you could in other biomes. Whether
Depending
it's
on where you're from.
yeah, depending on where you're spending your time. Actually,
Right.
when you create your character and you join a family, it's assumed that over the lifetime of your childhood, you will have picked up some of those skills, and so you have not only tribal bonuses but also regional bonuses, which are just based on where your family is from, and it has nothing to do with what kind of tribe you're a part of. It really just has to do with where you grew up as a part of that family. We would like to, at some point, after the players research sailing and start to get out into the oceans a little bit more, that we do develop those biomes. It's going to require some new procedural world generation for the underwater areas, and we do have to develop new food chains. But yeah, I think ultimately we do want to have an underwater biome. We don't at this point have invasive species. It's not a concept that we have. So if you plant things, it doesn't require resources from the environment around it to the point where it would kill off things that are there and can't exist. We thought about that. It was a mechanic that we wanted, but the amount of data and memory required to track every single plant in the world and figure out like how it's affecting the plants around it, like even when a world is as broad and dynamic and immersive as what we're trying to create, there's too much data associated with that.
Technically, but also design-wise, it would be a ton of work for something that probably wouldn't be noticed all that much. It's like in the background, plants are having their own war, but you can't ever see it because we don't show it.
Literally watching
we
watching the grass grow.
If you pay attention, maybe there'll be a change. With caves, because we met that goal and we're gonna have tunnels and caves, they're going to have, well, I wouldn't call them a biome of their own. I would say it would have a microbiome, a microclimate. It'll be unique to the above ground. You know, you're not gonna dig underneath a deciduous forest and find another deciduous forest. You're gonna find something interesting, something unique. I promise you that.
Soil type dictates whether or not you can dig down. That has to do whether or not you're just digging or trying to build tunnels and caves. There are some areas like the semi-arid deserts where you can, the ground is rocky and hard and you can like create caverns and caves and stuff like that. But if you're in like a full arid desert like dunes of the Sahara, like
Right.
you can't tunnel there. Like
Correct.
It's just not gonna work.
An occupation will arise for several reasons. For the flora, for the fauna, for the environment, which dictates the resources, right? So if you have a biome that is heavy in one type of resources, like trees, you're gonna need someone to cut down those trees because it ties into so many other things like economy. And so you're going to have a specific occupation arise in order to take advantage of the resources.
That's why we say it's a game of infinite metas, because we're not defining individual occupations or roles. We're giving you a cultural, an environmental and cultural experience, and the occupations and things that arise as a result of that is really predicated on the environment. Like everything, so much ties into the biome. That's one of the reasons why we spent so much time on defining these, is the biomes, the tribes, the cultures, the religions. All of these are so closely integrated that you can't create them in a vacuum, and we need to make sure that there's the correct balance, but ultimately all of those things tie into how you're going to spend your time in game. Yes. Mangroves even.
Mangroves. Cool. Swamps, marshes.
Not like foot high, but like waist high, like wade through, like you have to swim around or take a small boat.
Yeah. For some biomes, absolutely. You're not going to find horses everywhere. And you're going to find some creatures that are more suited to navigate through a certain environment,
That's true. Think about the camel.
Right.
What happens is that we have the continent that's generated, and then in that continent there are different high-level biomes and groups of biomes, like all the different dry areas like deserts and steppes and semi-arid and arid deserts. And then kingdom boundaries are going to kind of lie along those, and they're not all the same size. They're not all rectangular. They're different shapes and sizes. And then when you do settlement selection and domain selection, you get to look at the map and go, here's one kingdom. It exists inside of the desert region, and there are lots of desert duchies and things like that in it. And you go, I want that one. And obviously during settlement selection, it gets done in influence order. So the people who have higher influence as a result of either store purchases or community development, which we are working on getting those to you out at some point. The people that have the higher influence get to the opportunity to pick first.
We can't talk to diseases. I wouldn't count on that, but some areas will have things like snowstorms or sandstorms that will be localized to those areas because they're the only areas that support that kind of weather. I mean, pretty straightforward, pretty logical.
Chronicles of Elyria, we have always said, is kind of a low, mid-ish fantasy world.
Right.
As the story progresses, that may not always be true, and there might be other stuff at some point that is not like it is in our world.
Right.
Just gonna have to go find it. Find out. That's my answer. That's specifically the area we're thinking about, is being able to build walkways, platforms, and tunnel and hollow out large diameter trees so that you can build housing at high elevation above the trees. Tree houses, triple tree houses. You will require the same amount of water for survival. You're just not going to find any.
Yeah. It goes into problem spaces. Biomes are problem spaces. You know, what makes one biome an interesting play experience versus another is potentially what resources you can gather and how you go about gathering those resources. You know, challenges arise from the environment.
The underlying principle here is that biomes are different.
Yeah.
They provide each their own challenges. The economy and ecology is diverse across all of them. At any given time, you can just uproot and move to a different biome and your entire play experience changes.
Exactly. Variety.
One of the things that's super important for us is the balance of the ecology. We want to create a world that feels realistic, and we want the biomes to behave like they would in our world for the biomes that map to our world, and like they would in Elyria for the biomes that don't necessarily map to our world. And one of the ways that we do that is by making sure that there is equilibrium. And so one of the things that I'm working on, and Miguel and I have been talking about for a while, is basically going ahead and populating our biomes. We already know the flora and fauna that exists in those, and with each introduction of a new creature, putting them into effectively a simulation, and then letting the simulation play, and seeing what happens. As it plays, we can control things like reproduction rate, gestation period, how aggressive the creatures are, what their territory sizes are. There's all kinds of things that we can play with, but ultimately what we want to do is in the absence of players, we want the biomes to maintain equilibrium. And so we could let the server go, and within some variation, if we were to come back, you know, a day or from now, or even a week from now, the biome is effectively inside of a balanced state. Now, obviously, when people come along, we change that. We naturally disrupt the equilibrium. And that's part of the story inside of Elyria, is as players get into the world and they start disrupting the equilibrium, things that were a food source for other things are now going to no longer have a food source. And so they're going to have to look for a new food source. And you know, whether that's deforestation or taking out the primary producers, there is a balance to this all, and that's going to lead to, very quickly, you know, the pendulum swing where the players are going to go one direction because they do something in the environment, and that forces them to have to make adjustments the other direction. And it's going to be one of the challenges, I think, of any biome, and really Elyria in general, is going to be finding that equilibrium again.
Right.
All right, see you guys. We'll see you in January.
Bye.
Bye.